And we're going to bring in Courtney Brown, economics reporter for Axios, and Jonathan Hillman, a senior fellow for geoeconomics at the Council on Foreign Relations. Jonathan, I want to start with you. We just heard Steve talk about the ripple effects this is having on everybody, from the guy who's running the port to the lady who runs the coffee shop. We're now hearing the president float the idea of putting new tariffs potentially on things like computer chips and pharmaceutical drugs. What is that going to mean for consumers?
So we saw over the weekend a little bit of relief and some exclusions for some very high tariffs that were placed on Chinese products, especially for smartphones and a range of other electronics. I think that was done because the pain would have been quite severe if those were left on. However, though, U.S. officials have assured us that, don't worry, there are more tariffs coming. And so they've announced just yesterday that they'll be beginning a national security investigation into semiconductors as well as pharmaceuticals. So the timetable on that is a little bit uncertain, but we can expect tariffs to come in both areas.
Courtney, those seem like two very different products for a couple of reasons to me, and you can tell me if I'm an idiot, which I might be. But with things like laptops and electronics and chips, you know, folks can wait on that. They don't have to buy it if they can't afford it. But for things with pharmaceuticals, you know, is it realistic, if there's a production gap, to expect Americans who need a drug that's coming from overseas to not be able to get it for a long period of time or get it at an exorbitant price?
Right. Exactly how you say. There are some things that can be deferred. There are some things that are more discretionary than other goods. Drugs, not one of them. I think this speaks to the key issue at the heart of President Trump's tariff strategy, which is just, you cannot choke off global supply of something so crucial like pharmaceuticals when there is no domestic manufacturing supplier to kind of replace what you're cutting off, because that is in fact what tariffs do. He is seeking to use tariffs as a stick of sorts to convince manufacturers to produce more here in the U.S. But those two things can't happen at the same time. It takes so much time to build a facility and get workers and power it up. So there is going to be this gap, and I think it's a little worrisome to think about how that might affect the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah. Jonathan, I also want to ask you, because it is tax day, President Trump is now saying money from tariffs could potentially replace income taxes. I want you to listen to the sound we've got.
There is a chance that the money from tariffs could be so great that it would replace, you know, in the old days, about 1870 to 1913, the tariffs were the only form of money. And that's when our nation was relatively the richest. We were the richest.
Can you fact check that for us? Is the president right? Could we see so much revenue from tariffs that income tax could be a thing of the past?
So one of the things that often gets left out when these numbers are tossed around is that as the tariffs rise, the amount of trade declines. And so this is not a one-for-one where we're going to just, it's a little bit different than the IRS.
They're potentially looking at that formula based on the current level of U.S. trade, which the whole goal of this is to lessen that. That's
right. And I'm not holding my breath for this to be a real boon for government spending. And I'm also, frankly, not hoping to go back to 1870, when the U.S. was primarily, an agrarian country, and most homes didn't have electricity.
Yeah. Courtney, I have more stupid questions for you. One of the things that I've been wondering and should probably know the answer to, but don't, is when these tariffs are collected, where does that money go? What agency actually gets it? Who's holding it? How soon do you think we're going to see tariffs start to come in? Is it immediately? Are they already coming in? And how soon does it take to kind of ramp up to make sure all goods, like if it's on the water today, is it getting hit with that tariff? If it was on the water last week, can you kind of walk us through where the money goes?
I think this is the biggest untold story of what's happening with tariffs right now. A story that I'm working on, by the way. So thank you.
Well, give us a little preview. Yeah.
An opportunity to plug it. Customs and Border Protection is known for its role with immigration. But there's also a huge part of that agency that collects tariffs. And guess what? How quickly this trade policy is moving. There are workers at CBP trying to put the infrastructure in place to collect these tariffs. You might remember, it seems like years ago, but it was actually just a few months ago, the Trump administration announced an intention to collect tariffs on goods worth $800 or less. So whatever you're bringing in from Temu or Shein, those goods were going to get tariffs. And then they had to come back and say, just kidding, can't do that yet. We don't exactly have the infrastructure in place to collect the revenue. It seems like they're going to try again to kind of strike what's called the de minimis exemption and put those tariffs in place. But it's taken so much time for CBP to build the capacity to collect those tariffs. So there's kind of like this shadow system of trying to get the money that President Trump says is going to fill government coffers. We don't necessarily have all the things in place to do that yet.
And CBP's got a lot on its plate right now.
Exactly.
Jonathan, I also want to ask you, China's president is on a bit of a charm offensive across Southeast Asia. He urged Vietnam to, quote, oppose unilateral bullying and uphold free trade. The last two administrations, both Democrat and Republican, have been trying to forge closer ties, both militarily and economically, with Vietnam. Do you think Xi is seeing an opportunity here across Asia to maybe bring these folks who had been looking more towards the West back into China's fold?
Definitely. And so Chinese leader Xi Jinping has been not sitting at home waiting for President Trump to call him. He is out there, as you said, on a charm offensive in Vietnam, in Malaysia, and in Cambodia this week. And so they're talking about, opposing bullying and upholding the multilateral trade system. But they're doing more than talking, too. They've signed agreements to deepen cooperation on supply chains. They're pursuing a joint railroad project with Vietnam. And then they're going to look at deepening an agreement that they have with about 10 Southeast Asian countries. And so U.S. tariffs here are effectively rolling out the red carpet for Xi Jinping when he goes into these foreign markets.
Courtney, I also want to ask you about the other word we seem to talk about previously all the time, which is inflation. You've looked at Fed data about consumer concerns as the tariffs take hold. Is there a general worry what this all could do to the already high inflation rate in this country?
In the short term, yes.
Okay.
Consumers are expecting a pretty significant jump in inflation. We saw that in the
And why is that?
Well, they're expecting that companies are going to pass along the extra cost they get from tariffs. They're going to pass along right to the shelves of the things that they buy. Companies have a lot of experience doing that from this inflation shock that we just got through. I mean, I think that was a big shift between the pre-pandemic and the pandemic era. Companies learned how to raise prices. And so I think consumers hear coverage of that and they say, oh, my prices are going to go up, and they maybe rush out and buy things now to avoid potential price increases.
Deja vu all over again. All right. Jonathan Hillman, Courtney Brown, thank you both so much. I think I'm a little smarter now. I really appreciate it.